The marble halls of imperial Rome echoed with whispers that would make even the most debauched senators blush with shame. In the year 48 CE, as autumn shadows lengthened across the Seven Hills, the most scandalous woman in the empire's history prepared for what would become her final act of defiance. Her name was Valeria Messalina, third wife of Emperor Claudius, and the stories of her sexual exploits had already become legend throughout the Mediterranean world. But the tales you think you know barely scratch the surface of a woman whose appetites knew no bounds and whose political machinations threatened the very foundations of imperial power. This was not merely a case of an unfaithful wife seeking pleasure outside her marriage bed. This was systematic debauchery on a scale that would reshape our understanding of power, sexuality, and corruption in ancient Rome. Today we strip away centuries of sanitized historical accounts to reveal the terrifying reality of Messalina's reign of sexual terror. What drove a woman born into the highest echelons of Roman society to become the most feared predator in the empire? How did her insatiable hunger for both flesh and power bring her into direct conflict with forces that would ultimately destroy her? The answers lie buried beneath layers of imperial propaganda and moral condemnation, waiting to be excavated from the blood-soaked soil of Roman history. Valeria Messalina was born around 17 CE into a family that epitomized Roman aristocratic privilege. Her lineage traced back through generations of consulars and military commanders, her bloodline intertwining with the very foundations of imperial power. Her mother, Domitia Lepida, belonged to one of Rome's most prestigious patrician families, while her father's connections reached deep into the imperial court itself. From her earliest years, Messalina moved through a world where absolute power and absolute corruption walked hand in hand. The imperial palace was not merely a residence, but a theatre of political intrigue where survival depended on understanding the complex web of alliances, betrayals, and sexual liaisons that determined who lived and who died. Young Messalina observed how her female relatives wielded influence through carefully cultivated relationships, how they traded sexual favors for political protection, and how they destroyed enemies through whispered accusations of adultery or treason. The Rome of Messalina's youth was a city intoxicated by its own power and drowning in unprecedented wealth. Gold flowed from conquered territories across 3 continents, slaves filled every household, and the traditional moral constraints that had once governed Roman behavior crumbled beneath the weight of imperial excess. The old republican virtues of modesty and restraint had become quaint relics in a world where emperors married their sisters and senators competed to display their wealth through increasingly elaborate displays of debauchery. Into this environment stepped a young woman whose beauty was matched only by her cunning intelligence and voracious sexual appetite. Contemporary accounts describe Messalina as possessing the kind of physical perfection that stopped conversation in crowded rooms. Her dark hair fell in carefully arranged curls that framed features so symmetrical they seemed carved by the gods themselves. But behind those captivating eyes lurked a calculating mind that had already begun plotting her ascent to the pinnacle of Roman power. The marriage that would define her destiny came in 38 CE, when she was barely 20 years old. Emperor Claudius, then 58 and recently elevated to power following Caligula's assassination, required a wife who could provide both political legitimacy and dynastic continuity. Messalina represented the perfect choice on paper, young, fertile, and connected to all the right families through her aristocratic bloodline. But Claudius had miscalculated catastrophically. Rather than gaining a dutiful wife who would enhance his political position, he had unleashed a sexual predator whose appetites would soon terrorize the entire imperial court. The emperor's physical disabilities, including a pronounced limp and speech impediment, made him an object of ridicule among the Roman elite. His scholarly interests and preference for administrative work over military campaigns further diminished his masculine credibility in a culture that valued physical prowess above intellectual achievement. Messalina recognized her husband's weaknesses immediately and began exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. While Claudius buried himself in legal reforms and infrastructure projects, his young wife transformed the imperial palace into her personal hunting ground. No man or woman was safe from her advances, and those who attempted to refuse her invitations quickly discovered the lethal consequences of disappointing the empress. the Empress developed a systematic approach to sexual conquest that combined psychological manipulation with political coercion. She would first identify targets based on their physical attractiveness, social position, or potential usefulness to her broader schemes. Then she would deploy a carefully orchestrated campaign of seduction that might include expensive gifts, promises of political advancement, or subtle threats against family members. Those who succumbed to her advances found themselves trapped in a web of mutual blackmail and dependency. Messalina collected sexual secrets like other women collected jewelry, building an extensive network of compromised individuals who owed their continued existence to her discretion. Senators who had submitted to her advances in private found themselves voting for her preferred policies in public, while military commanders discovered that their career prospects depended entirely on maintaining the Empress's favor. But Messalina's sexual conquests extended far beyond the traditional boundaries of Roman society. She actively sought out partners from the lowest social classes, finding particular excitement in debasing herself with gladiators, actors, and common soldiers. These liaisons served multiple purposes. They satisfied her cravings while simultaneously providing her with informants throughout Roman society who could report on potential threats to her position. The Empress's appetite for sexual variety knew no bounds. Contemporary sources describe elaborate orgies held in the imperial palace where Messalina would compete with professional prostitutes to see who could service the most men in a single evening. These competitions were not mere displays of sexual athleticism, but carefully orchestrated political events where the Empress demonstrated her absolute power over both her body and her subjects. Palace servants whispered of secret chambers where Messalina would retire with multiple partners, emerging hours later disheveled but triumphant while her exhausted companions struggled to maintain consciousness. The sounds emanating from these sessions reportedly echoed through the marble corridors, serving as constant reminders to everyone within earshot of the Empress's insatiable hunger. Yet behind this facade of pure hedonism lay a calculating political mind that understood how sexual power could translate into imperial influence. Every liaison was strategic, every conquest served a broader purpose in Messalina's grand design to control the Roman Empire through a combination of blackmail, manipulation, and fear. The Empress began systematically eliminating potential rivals through accusations of adultery and treason. Her method was elegantly simple. She would seduce the husbands of prominent women, then use evidence of their infidelity to destroy entire families. Wives who posed threats to her position would find themselves facing charges of conspiracy or immorality, often based on testimony from men who had been coerced into providing false evidence after being compromised by the Empress herself. This reign of sexual terror reached its peak during the mid-40s CE when Messalina's confidence in her own invincibility led her to increasingly bold and dangerous gambles. She began openly flaunting her affairs, hosting elaborate banquets where she would appear with different lovers each night, while her husband remained obliviously focused on his administrative duties. The Empress's behavior created a climate of fear throughout Roman high society, where no marriage was safe and no reputation secure. Prominent families began withdrawing from court life entirely, preferring exile to the risk of becoming entangled in Messalina's web of sexual and political intrigue. The imperial court had become a battlefield where virtue itself was the casualty, and Messalina stood triumphant over the corpse of Roman morality. By 47 CE, her influence had grown so pervasive that even the most powerful senators found themselves calculating not just political alliances, but sexual strategies to survive in her presence. The Empress had transformed the very act of entering the imperial palace into a form of Russian roulette, where one's continued existence depended on navigating her mercurial desires. Her network of informants had expanded beyond the palace walls to encompass every level of Roman society. Tavern keepers reported conversations between their patrons, bathhouse attendants eavesdropped on private discussions, and even the city's prostitutes served as her eyes and ears throughout Rome's sprawling underworld. This intelligence allowed apparatist Messalina to anticipate threats before they materialized and to identify new targets for her sexual and political machinations. The Empress developed increasingly elaborate rituals around her conquests that blended religious ceremony with carnal indulgence. She would don the costume of various goddesses during her encounters, claiming divine inspiration for her actions while simultaneously mocking the traditional religious practices that had once provided moral guidance to Roman society. These blasphemous performances were witnessed by carefully selected audiences who understood that their silence had been purchased with their participation in acts that would destroy them if revealed. Palace records from this period, carefully preserved despite later attempts at suppression, reveal the staggering scale of Messalina's sexual activities. On a single day in late 47 CE, she reportedly entertained no fewer than 25 different partners in various combinations and configurations. These encounters were meticulously documented by her personal secretary, a Greek nervous freedman who understood that his survival depended on maintaining accurate records of his mistress's activities. The Empress's appetite extended beyond mere physical gratification to encompass psychological domination of her victims. She derived particular pleasure from corrupting individuals who had previously been considered models of Roman virtue. Respected magistrates found themselves performing degrading acts in her presence, while celebrated military heroes discovered that their reputations could be destroyed by a single whispered accusation from the Empress. Messalina's influence began manifesting itself in imperial policy as Claudius, either through willful ignorance or genuine blindness to his wife's activities, relied on her counsel in, increasingly, matters of state. Laws were passed that seemed to favor her interests, government positions were awarded to her allies, and military commands went to officers who had demonstrated their loyalty through intimate service to the Empress. The transformation of Roman governance under Messalina's hidden influence represented a fundamental shift from the traditional masculine virtues that had built the empire to a system based on sexual submission and moral corruption. Veterans who had conquered Britain found themselves kneeling before a woman whose only battlefield was the bedchamber, while diplomats who had negotiated with barbarian kings discovered that their careers now depended on satisfying the Empress's carnal demands. Contemporary observers began noting disturbing changes in Roman society that reflected Messalina's corrupting influence. Marriage rates among the aristocracy declined as families became reluctant to expose their daughters to the moral cesspit that court life had become. Birth rates dropped among patrician families who understood that producing beautiful children might attract the Empress's unwanted attention. The traditional Roman celebration of feminine virtue and chastity gave way to a culture where sexual availability became a form of currency and moral compromise was the price of political advancement. Young women from prominent families found themselves coached by their mothers in techniques of seduction, not to attract worthy husbands but to survive potential encounters with the Empress. Messalina's predatory behavior extended to sex bothers with equal enthusiasm. She collected beautiful young men like trophies while simultaneously pursuing relationships with women whose positions or connections served her broader political objectives. These same-sex encounters were particularly shocking, just moralating not contemporary sensibilities, vile too, but fundamental expectations Roman concepts about proper gender roles and social hierarchy. The Empress's bisexual appetites created additional opportunities for blackmail and control. Prominent women who had submitted to her advances found themselves permanently compromised, unable to protest her subsequent actions without risking exposure of their own participation in activities that Roman law considered criminal. This created an expanding circle of complicit silence that protected Messalina's position while ensuring that her victims remained loyal through mutual destruction. Her sexual experimentation extended beyond traditional Roman boundaries to include practices imported from the furthest reaches of the empire. Exotic techniques learned from Syrian courtesans, Germanic tribal rituals, and Egyptian temple ceremonies were incorporated into elaborate performances that combined theatrical spectacle with religious blasphemy and sexual excess. Palace architects were commissioned to design specialized chambers equipped with mechanical devices imported from Alexandria and Athens. These rooms featured adjustable furniture, complex mirror arrangements, and even primitive steam systems that could create different atmospheric conditions for the Empress's various activities. The engineering required for these installations represented a perverse application of Roman technological prowess to the service of imperial debauchery. The economic impact of Messalina's reign of sexual terror rippled throughout Roman society as families diverted resources from productive investments to purchasing protection from the empress's attention. Wealthy merchants paid enormous bribes to ensure their wives and daughters remained beneath her notice, while ambitious young men bankrupted themselves buying access to her inner circle. This systematic corruption of Roman institutions reached its logical conclusion when Messalina began directly interfering in legal proceedings. Judges found their verdicts predetermined by the empress's sexual preferences, with cases decided not on evidence or law, but on whether the defendants had satisfied her desires. Justice became another commodity to be purchased through intimate service to the imperial court. The empress's growing boldness led her to increasingly public displays of her power over Roman society. She would appear at gladiatorial games accompanied by different lovers each day, openly fondling them while her husband delivered speeches about traditional Roman values. These performances served as deliberate provocations that demonstrated her absolute confidence in her ability to manipulate tedious and intimidate potential opponents. By early 48 CE, Messalina's behavior had become so extreme that even her most compromised allies began questioning whether she'd maintain her position indefinitely. Whispers circulated through the palace corridors about growing opposition among military commanders who had remained outside of sexual her-web blackmail and retained enough integrity to recognize the threat she posed to imperial stability. But Messalina's insatiable hunger for power and pleasure contained the seeds of her own destruction. In November of 48 CE, while Claudius attended religious ceremonies in Ostia, the empress committed an act so brazen that even her network of compromised allies could not protect her. She married her lover, Gaius Silius, in a public ceremony that represented not merely adultery but outright treason against the imperial throne. This final gambit revealed the fundamental miscalculation that had driven her entire career. Messalina had confused sexual power with political invincibility, believing that her ability to corrupt and control individuals could overcome the institutional forces that maintained imperial authority. When news of her bigamous marriage reached Claudius, the emperor's advisors finally found the courage to act against the woman who had terrorized Rome for nearly a decade. The empress, who had destroyed countless lives through sexual manipulation, met her end not in the elaborate chambers where she had orchestrated her reign of terror, but in a garden where soldiers dispatched her with brutal efficiency. Her death marked the end of one of history's most extraordinary examples of how sexual predation could be weaponized for political control. Valeria Messalina's legacy serves as a chilling reminder that power without moral restraint inevitably consumes itself. Her story reveals the terrifying potential for corruption when sexual exploitation becomes systematized and when society's guardians become complicit in their own degradation. In the end, the empress who had transformed Rome's greatest palace into a brothel discovered that even the most elaborate web of blackmail and manipulation could not overcome the fundamental human need for justice and dignity.